I have been making over trash cans into tall planters for quite a long time. Typically, I'll just use a little bit of spray paint and maybe some different techniques of spray painting the different trash cans. And they've been really fun, but I've really wanted to turn these tall trash cans into a different type of planter. I want to see if I can make a DIY tall trash can planter that looks like a high-end concrete tall planter. And I'm going to show you how I did it right now.
It all just goes away. The things I plan to say. Oh, baby.
So these are the planters, also known as trash cans, that I have made over multiple times using different types of paint. But I decided, you know what, I want to make these look like concrete planters. And these aren't anything fancy, these are Sterilite trash cans, but I've had them forever and they've actually held up really well. And right now they have a chalk paint on the trash cans on the outside. And like I said, they've held up so well. So the first thing I want to do is rough up the planter itself. So I just took some 80 grit sandpaper because that was what I had, and I just roughed up the paint job that was already on the planter. I think if you use a lower grit sandpaper, it will work even better. So I didn't have any concrete, but I did have this concrete patch by Quikrete, and it's a vinyl concrete patcher, and I was like, you know what, I'm going to give this a try. So this concrete patcher is actually vinyl and it's a powder. So I just poured it into a bigger container and then I used a little bit of water. It didn't take very much water for how much of this concrete patch that I was using. So it's always easier to add a little bit more water than put too much water in the first place. And the consistency is pretty thick because I wasn't sure how this was going to turn out. But doing any type of work like this with cement or concrete, you really need to protect your hands. So I got a pair of rubber gloves from the Dollar Tree because they're affordable and they're nice and long. So I put on the gloves first. Next, I applied the concrete patch, so concrete basically, to the planter. Now, when I first started, I wasn't sure what type of a technique I was going to be using. I thought it would be easiest to spread the concrete onto the trash can just using my hands. I've used this type of a pattern before, and that really wasn't the look that I was going for. I wanted to have more of a random pattern, so I decided to use the putty knife that I had, and I would apply the concrete to the trash can with the putty knife. Now, I really like using the putty knife for applying the concrete because you can see all of the different texture and pattern and the different directions that I can make the concrete go. So I think that using the putty knife is probably the best way to go, especially when you get to the top of the trash can itself. As you can see, I can use that putty knife to fill in that little lip that's right around the top edge of the trash can. This is one difference out of any of these trash can planters that I've made that I think makes the biggest difference. At least it does in my opinion, and it makes it look more like a planter and less like a trash can. So I just kept applying the concrete mixture onto the trash can with the putty knife, and I changed the directions that I was going. So there's different variations in all of the raised edges on the planter. Now, after the first coat of concrete, this is what my planters looked like. I do like that texture, but I am going to add a second layer of the concrete vinyl patcher. So I took the rest of the concrete powder that I had and I made it a little bit thinner. So I added a little bit more water, so it's a lot sloppier putting it on this way. As you can see, well, that doesn't look too sloppy. But I think you can tell that it is definitely thinner than the first layer of the concrete that I did. But this worked really well in adhering to the trash can, which honestly I didn't think was going to work. So I just applied a second layer of that concrete to the entire trash can, actually to 2 trash cans and a small planter because, why not? I wanted to see what it would look like. Now I should say in between each of the coats of the concrete that I applied, I did let each layer dry completely. So I would put on a layer of the concrete and then I let it dry for 24 hours before moving on to the next layer. But honestly, this is so much fun to play around with, and you can do whatever you want. You could use your hands, you can use a putty knife, whatever you have to make this trash can planter look like a concrete planter. It is so much fun. I did go ahead and add a little bit more of that concrete mixture to the top edge of the planter as well. Now this is what the second layer of the concrete looks like on the planter. And again, I am really happy with the texture that the concrete gave to the trash can. Now, once that was completely dry, I did go ahead and coat it with a layer, pretty heavy layer of a clear satin spray paint because I didn't want the raised edges of the concrete to break off, and I was a little bit worried that it might. So to help keep everything in place and seal this concrete, I did use that spray paint, and honestly, it worked really well. And this was just spray paint that I found at Walmart. And once I was done applying the spray paint, I let that completely dry. Now I had this bare barn and fence paint, so this is an exterior paint that I use for painting my barn and things like that. But I wanted to add a little bit of this white paint over top of the gray concrete because I want to see more of the definition of the layers of the concrete. So I just used a cheap chip brush and I basically just put a little bit of the paint onto the paintbrush and then added some water because I don't want this to have a complete white look to it. I do want to see some of the differences, the darkness in the concrete, and then have that white kind of show through. And I used more water than paint on the paintbrush, and then I just worked my way around the planter. And one thing I can tell you when you are painting something like this is don't be afraid. I found that if you're timid in your painting, and you're not really committed to it, it's gonna show up in your work and your planter. So just go for it. If you're not happy with the result, you can always add a different color. Just adding that on with a little bit of water or even a sponge or even a paper towel will give you some really nice texture on top of the texture that you already have with this planter. Now I wanted to show you the difference. So this planter that looks more white, this one has the paint on it. This is the original concrete color. So you can kind of play around and see what works best for you. But these are my planters, and holy cow, oh my gosh, I am so happy with how these turned out. Even this little planter, it looks so awesome. And these are gonna look fantastic when they have real plants in them this coming summer. And if you're enjoying this video, go ahead and hit that subscribe button and then hit the like button. Again, I'm so excited with how these planters turned out. I can't believe it took me this long to make them. If I would have done this the first time that I got these trash cans, I wouldn't have any other trash can planters because these are by far my favorite and they were very simple to make. So go find some tall trash cans and make some DIY concrete planters for yourself.